invite all of you to come and eat ribs, or at least view this video and learn how to cook the ribs. I've cooked the ribs for all these years for people that I love, and so I want to share them with you. And that's my family, my sister that lives over in Oklahoma, and of course all the faculty that I worked with for over 30 years. Come on. And most important, the students over all that time. The closest people that I had were those students, and so come on and have a rib with us, and a salad, and a bean, maybe even some fish. You know, this all came about through the years. People have asked me, well, what's your secret on the cooking? When did you start cooking? What got you interested in cooking in the first place? And I'm excited about making this tape through the efforts of Chris Roberts, because it's kind of the end of an era, and it sure has been an enjoyable one for me. And I just almost want to say, something good is going to happen to you today. But, I won't. Just kidding. I won't say that. And I'm not going to tell you my life story. No, I'm not going to do that. I actually started cooking through the efforts of my dad many years ago, and we had a big family, and so he would try to sneak off with me and take me camping. My sister had moved back in with us, 3 kids, and so on and so forth. Anyway, that's not important, but so we'd go camping. And my dad, that's where I first saw charcoal cooking. My dad had a little black grill about this big and about this wide, and it had a hexagon top on it. And he would sneak off and buy a couple of T-bone steaks and take them up on the river where we'd camp out, and he said, well, I'm going to try this new stuff. It's called Adolph's Meat Tenderizer. And he said, don't think it's going to do a bit of good, but he said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to jam it into the meat. So if it'll do any good, it'll work if I jam it all the way through there. So he took a fork and he jammed that Adolph's Meat Tenderizer all the way through that meat. And my dad liked to squeeze the grape a little bit, so to speak. And so I remember one particular camping trip. He'd always done the cooking. I'd never done it. And so this particular trip, he got a little bit on the warm side, and he said, okay, you cook. And so, I mean, just out of observance, thrown out in the river, so to speak, and swim back. And but by the way, he used to do that too. He'd play games with me. He'd take me out in the middle of the river and throw me out and let me swim back. It was easy after I got out of the sack. No, just kidding. So anyway, I cooked that day the same way he did. And that's what got me started. And T-bone steaks are easy to cook. You can't make a T-bone steak taste bad. So from there I branched out and started experimenting, and that's when I first started cooking. To the band camp now. Years ago when I came, 31 years ago when I came to the band camp, it had already been going about 4 or 5 years. And there was a fellow named Bob Jordan, and Bob was a great cook. And Bob was hired to just cook for the band camp. He cooked brisket and ribs and baked beans and stuff. And old Bob was, he didn't want you anywhere around him. He was very secretive. He cooked in an old refrigerator. And he had him a little hole punched in there, a little vent, and he'd open that door, and that boy, if you got near him, he'd just eat you alive. You know, he just didn't want him. But I learned a lot from Bob, especially on how to tenderize the meat and also how to make the beans. He's the first person I saw that used sorghum molasses in beans, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Bob got tired of cooking for the band camp after about 2 or 3 years, and plus it made him just totally angry when we would do ratings. You know, we'd say, well, this time it was 1 minus. Boy, he'd just go cry. You guys shut up. I hate that. Don't grade me on anything. You know? I get enough of that with my band. So I guess we ran him off is what it amounted to. And so we started passing the cooking around then. And I would cook one time, and Don Kramer would cook, and Wendy Evanson would cook. And Wendy didn't really have time to do it because he was running the band camp, and then to try to go home and cook on top of all of that, and plus he was directing the band too. And Don, he was another one that loved to tip the juice just a little bit, and he would start. There was a fella he loved to visit with named Jack Daniels, and he and old Jack would shake hands about 5 in the afternoon. And Don wouldn't even start cooking until about 11 that night. And then I'm sure we were also hungry by that time. We ate it about half raw sometimes. And we wouldn't get out of there till 2 o'clock. At that time the camp would have a pony keg and stuff. And so it was a wild experience. And that's what made me volunteer to do the cooking the first time. Because I thought, golly, we got to get these guys back to band camp. The next morning after the cookout, the guys didn't even have any, their lips wouldn't even move. You know, they'd go to section rehearsal and go, oh. Kids didn't learn much from that. So anyway, I volunteered to do the cooking, and so I'd borrow Don's cooker, and he had one of those Weber, little square Weber things, and Wendy had one of those little square Weber things, and I had what you call a Duchess cooker, I think it's the best cooker I ever had, and it was this little pyramid shaped thing. Anyway, on those 3 cookers I did the cooking for the band camp, and did it by myself. And that went on for a few years, and in addition to doing that, Wendy had no mercy. As director of the camp, I was doing 3 section rehearsals, a master class, and the cooking. And then I was also in charge of some auditions and some other stuff. It nearly killed me. And so my wife bought me a welder outfit, a acetylene torch, and so I'll build a cooker. And so I did. And it was just a rectangular shaped thing, sloped on the top. I'm pretty proud of myself on that. It had vents on the top. And I made baskets, just expanded metal baskets, and I put the charcoal in those baskets. And so if the fire was too hot, I'd just take the basket out, and if it was not hot enough, I'd put a basket in, and I could have another basket out here and fire up new charcoals. It really worked great. And when I was making that thing, the first time I was using, it wasn't the first time I was using my welder's torch, but I was going down the side of it, and I smelled something burning. Oh boy, it sure is hot out here today. And I kept going a little bit, and then I looked, and my pants were on fire down by the shin. So I grabbed an old t-shirt and stamped the fire out on the leg, and you would have thought that would have discouraged me finishing the cooker, but I finished it and was real proud of it. And on that, I could do, on one cooker, I could do as much as all 3 of those small cookers. So as the band camp grew, I eventually was doing 3 cookers on that. So I was virtually cooking all day, and still doing 3 section rehearsals and 2 master classes. After I got the first new cooker built, boy, that really made things a lot easier on me from that point. And then another thing happened along about that time. Mr. Evanson retired, and David Rollins for the first time said, well, you need some help doing that. And so that's when I started getting student helpers from the band camp to come out and help me. And one of my just sources of joy in life are some of the stories that occurred, and some of the fun things that occurred with those students coming out over the years. And to the person, to this very day, we mention Branstine duty, and we'll laugh, and everybody seems to enjoy that. And I guess virtually everybody in the band camp, every freshman in the band camp, for about the second 15 years, first 15 years I did by myself, the second 15 years I had help, and that was great. That went on for, up to about, I guess, 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago. I can't remember exactly. And the band camp kept growing and growing, and the camp staff kept growing and growing, and so I outgrew even the second cooker. And so I told David Rollins, I said, well, I can't, this is just a little bit too big a job for me. I don't think I can make another cooker. And he said, well, can you make one just like the one that you made and do it that way? And I said, no, I don't think so. And I said, I need to buy a cooker. I'll design it myself and but we need to let somebody, well, can you get the money for that? And he said, yeah, I can get the money for that. Well, neither one of us had any idea how much that thing was going to cost. So I tried to draw it out, the big cooker, I tried to draw it out on paper, and I couldn't ever get the angles and everything. I couldn't make it look like what was in my mind. So I built a cardboard model of it, and I built it to scale, and I put the measurements on the cardboard, even down to the latches on the doors, and took it out to the welder guy, and I said, can you make this from this? And he said, why? He said, why yeah. Oh, he said, that's better than a blueprint. And so sure enough, they built the cooker. Is that when I'm talking about grilling, I'm talking about generally smokers. And if you use just a regular grill, just a round grill, what you do is you put all the charcoals and the hickory over on one side, and you put the meat over on the other side, and that makes the smoke swirl around the meat. And on the smokers like I have here, the firebox is all the way down to one end. On the big smoker downstairs, the firebox is completely separate from the cooker part itself. And that makes that smoke, you don't have to ever turn the ribs, because the smoke is so hot and moving so fast that it swirls around the ribs, and it will cook them done, top, bottom, and side. You don't have to do another thing. In cooking the ribs, there's no secret to cooking the ribs, and I don't use any kind of exotic seasonings or anything like that. The first thing you want to do is on your hickory, get hickory chunks rather than hickory chips, and you want to soak them for about 5 hours before you use them. And that's just so that they don't flame up right at the first. They'll smoke more if they're soaked, and about a minimum of about 5 hours on that. The chunks, not chips. The charcoal itself, it doesn't matter much. I like that self-lighting stuff. It tends to burn hotter quicker. And you want to use a lot of charcoal, and here is, if there is a secret, this is one of them right here. People think that I cook the ribs all day, 12 hours, and that's not the case. But what I do is I cook with the grill. You need a thermometer on the grill, and it has to be at least 350 degrees. And when you close that lid and add the hickory, you put the meat on there, and then you add the hickory. And when you do that, that swirling smoke is almost like a microwave. And if you can get it up there about 400 degrees, boy, it cooks pretty fast. And when you cook it like that, it tends to seal the meat in, and I think the flavor. And usually I check it every 15 minutes, and that seems like 15 minutes, but if it's up there around 400 degrees and swirling smoke, it'll cook quickly. And then I check it at 30 minutes, and then I check it at 45. Normally it's going to take about, if you have your charcoals hot and you have your hickory chips soaked real good, it'll take about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour to cook. And something we found out by accident, after you get the ribs cooked, we put them in those ice boxes just out of necessity to serve them. But if you put them in a closed container and let them steam a little bit, they're even more tender still. And then you serve them hot. The meat itself is a little bit on the unique side. because about 15 years ago I sponsored the Phi Mu Alpha group, and they said, well, we want you to cook for us. And heck, I cooked for the band camp and everybody else. So I said, sure, I'll cook for you. And Billy Randall, Dr. Randall now, fine composer, theory teacher, but old Billy Randall said, you know, my dad can get those ribs for you a lot cheaper. And I said, does he have a grocery store? And he said, no, Randall Meat Packing in Hot Springs. And I said, well, can he cut them thicker than you can buy them? And he said he can cut them any way you want. So I started out getting them special cut at Randall Meat Packing. And I asked him one time, I said, what kind of ribs are those? And he said, well, if you start cutting pork chops from the loin of the hog and you start down and you run out of pork chop, then that becomes what you call pork backbone, or some of the stores call it country backbone or country back rib. And that's what we get. You can't get the same kind of ribs that we use at band camp in the store. In the store they have shoulder ribs. That's what I have here today, but they're boneless, so that's great, but they're not as thick, and they're not they have more fat in them than the ribs we get at Randall Meat Packing. You can order them at Randall's if you so desire. When you unpackage the ribs, I like to spread them out in a straight line so that when I'm seasoning them, I don't miss anything. I go rib by rib, and I do every one of them individually. And I start with Adolph's meat tenderizer. That's first, and then you go with Lowry's garlic salt. And there are other garlic salts, McCormick's. A lot of people make garlic salt. But the Lowry's is the best because it has those little flecks of parsley in there, and you can see what you're putting on there. And also the Lowry's is flaky. It's not salt, just salt grains. And to me, it tends to stay on the meat better. So you put the Adolph's meat tenderizer unseasoned. Now, you can use seasoned, and the only difference that I can find in them is that the seasoned has more salt in it. So you use unseasoned meat tenderizer, Lowry's garlic salt, and then just regular table salt on one side only. And if you use the unseasoned, you say, well, if the unseasoned already has the salt in there, why don't you use that? And the only reason I don't is because you can't control the amount of salt that way. And usually they get a little bit too salty. So I use unseasoned and just salt one side with table salt. And then back to my dad's old forking thing. I mean, I jam a fork all the way through them. Now they make those fancy forkers now, commercial forkers, I guess, and they're spring loaded and they have points on them, and I'll show you one. And you can jam those all the way down through, and they really work well. Probably better than a fork, although I like the old-fashioned fork. It will work that way, but I think it does a better job. So anyway, you fork the meat, flip it over, do the same thing on the other side. Adolph's, Lowry's, no salt on that side, fork it all the way through, and then you're ready to cook. And when you put the ribs on the grill, I never cook that I don't have more ribs than I have grill. So the students, the kids all the time, I tell them to put them 1/4 of an inch apart, side to side, and they cannot touch. If a rib touches anywhere, it'll have a white spot or a spot that won't get as done on it, because it actually makes it twice as thick if it touches. So anyway, end to end they can touch, but not side by side. Okay, you want the charcoals, before you ever add any hickory or anything else, you want the charcoals to be white hot, because you want that oven to be very, very hot. And after you get the charcoals down here in the firebox or to the side of your grill, whatever, white hot, you put the meat on opposite those. And then after you get the meat on there, then add your hickory on top of the white hot charcoals. And that's important because that wet hickory hitting those white hot charcoals makes them instantly smoke. And that smoke really, it starts swirling very, very soon. And then they're probably going to flame up. And a lot of people worry about that and take little squirt guns and things and try to make it not flame up. Don't do that, because that flame makes it even hotter still. And the hotter, the better. And so then you go through that process that we talked about earlier. Cook them hot, and cook them for about an hour usually, and they'll get done. Serve them hot. The best rib I ever cooked, I think, was because it was fresh. And old Mike McLemore was my helper. And Mike had some sayings he loved to say, you know, oh, that'd make you whoop your grandma away from the table. And so we had cooked this new cooker, and I was worried about whether or not it would work or not. And so old Mike and I lifted up that new cooker, and there was that meat. Boy, it was just beautiful. It was red on the outside, and I cut it open. It was white on the inside. Just perfectly done. And old Mike and I cut that rib in half, and old Mike and I dove into it at the same time. And, of all the yelling and screaming, you'd have thought it was 4th of July. It was one, but it was probably the best rib I ever tasted. Old Mike says, that's it, you've got it, the formula. He was kind of big then. He stuck his chest and stomach out and said, the formula. In the background we heard the Ride of the Valkyries, you know.